The sun sank behind the far mesas, turning the whole western sky to fire and then to a bruised, fading violet. The desert wind shifted, cool and heavy with the smell of rain that had not yet come. Thomas Grady stood on the porch of the only thing left that still bore his name, Grady Ranch. A lonely scatter of weathered boards and rusted metal perched at the edge of an empty valley. The windmill moaned and turned in uneven circles. The old man stood still, boots planted in dust, one hand holding a dented tin cup that had long since lost its shine. The coffee inside was black and cold. He sipped it anyway, because there was nothing else to do. It had been that way for 12 years. The days all looked the same. Morning brought the same silence, the same long stretch of fences that no longer mattered, the same fields where cattle no longer grazed. At noon, the heat shimmered and made the horizon dance. By evening, the shadows grew long and thin, sliding across the ground until they touched his boots. That was when the memories came. He would look out toward the far ridges where he once rode with men who were now bones in the earth. He would think of Mary, the woman who once filled this place with laughter, who had died before her hair ever turned gray. He had buried her beneath the old mesquite tree near the creek bed, where the water still whispered faintly, even when the drought turned everything else to dust. Sometimes he spoke to her grave. Sometimes he cursed the sky. But mostly, he was quiet. The land was quieter too. Wolves no longer came this far south. The soldiers had driven most of the Apache off or killed them. The rest had fled toward the mountains. Those who could survive. The government called it peace. Grady called it emptiness. He had not seen another soul for almost 6 months, unless one counted the hawks that circled high and hungry, waiting for something to die. When the sun slipped away that night, he thought it would end like every other alone, with the fire crackling and the night wind crawling through the cracks in the walls. But then, just before darkness took the sky, something moved at the edge of the north fence. He squinted, his eyes narrowing beneath his hat brim. Shapes, 5 of them. At first he thought they were coyotes on 2 legs, or maybe riders keeping low in the dusk. But as they drew closer, he saw that they were walking slowly, as if every step cost them strength they did not have. They came out of the rain's first breath, faint drizzle turning to mist around them. Women, Apache, at the look of them. Grady's hand drifted toward, the rifle propped against the porch rail. The instinct was old and hard to shake. The years had taught him that strangers brought trouble, and the Apache had been enemies once. Long ago, when this valley still bled red with war. But when the wind lifted the shawls from their faces, he saw no hate there, only exhaustion. Their eyes were hollow and rimmed with dust. Their skin was cracked from sun and wind. The oldest looked barely 40, her hair streaked with gray. The youngest clung to her arm, thin as a reed, her bare feet caked in mud. They stopped just beyond the porch, hesitant like wild deer that had wandered too close to a trap. The eldest woman took a step forward and spoke. Her words came slow, part Apache, part broken English. The meaning was clear enough. They had been walking for days. They had no food. Soldiers had driven them from their camp. They asked for shelter, for one night to rest before moving on. The rain began to fall harder, a steady tapping on the roof that sounded like a drumbeat from another world. Grady said nothing for a long while. The rifle stayed where it was, though his hand never left it. He looked past the women toward the valley. No riders followed them. No torches glowed on the horizon. Only rain and wind. He had every reason to turn them away. The law said harboring Apache meant trouble. The soldiers who patrolled the nearby fort would burn his ranch to the ground if they found out. But laws had stopped meaning much to Thomas Grady years ago. Out here, there was only what a man could live with when he closed his eyes at night, and when his gaze dropped to the youngest girl. Trembling under a threadbare blanket, he saw his daughter's face. The same frightened eyes, the same small hands. His daughter had died before she turned 15. Fever had taken her fast. He remembered sitting by her bed while Mary prayed and cried and the wind howled through the windows. He had held her hand until it went cold. That was the night something in him broke. The memory hit him like a hammer. He turned his back to the rain and pushed open the door. His voice came out rough, as though unused to speech. He told them to come in. They hesitated only a moment, then hurried through the doorway, dripping and shivering. The inside of the cabin smelled of wood smoke and age. Dust lay thick on the shelves, and the hearth was burning low. Grady added a few logs and stirred the fire until it crackled alive again, throwing orange light across the faces of the women. They huddled close to it, whispering softly among themselves. Steam rose from their wet clothes. The old boards of the cabin creaked under the sudden life it hadn't felt in years. From a small cupboard, Grady brought what food he had left: half a sack of cornmeal, some strips of dried venison, and 1 can of beans he had been saving for the week ahead. He poured the beans into a pot and set it over the fire. The smell filled the room, and for the first time in months, the cabin felt almost like a home again. They ate slowly, careful not to take more than what he gave. The eldest woman bowed her head in quiet thanks. The others followed her lead. The youngest, too hungry to wait, burned her tongue and smiled through the pain. Grady watched them in silence. He wasn't sure what to say, or if there was anything worth saying at all. The rain outside grew heavier, steady roar against the roof. Lightning flickered far away, lighting the desert in pale flashes. Grady set a bucket under a leak that had started near the door. The women jumped at the thunder, and he told them there was nothing to fear, though his tone was gruff. He found a few wool blankets in a trunk by the bed and handed them out. They took them like precious gifts. When the food was gone, and the fire burned steady, the women began to relax. The eldest murmured to the others, her voice low and rhythmic. They spoke of mountains and rivers, of brothers who had been taken by soldiers, of homes they would never see again. Grady didn't understand most of the words, but he caught the sadness in their tone. He kept his eyes on the fire, his thoughts drifting between past and present. He thought of the men he had once fought beside it, men who had sworn they were bringing order to the frontier. He remembered the screams, the burned camps, the small faces staring from behind rocks. The line between good and evil had blurred long ago, smudged by time and guilt. One by one, the women fell asleep near the fire. The youngest rested her head on her mother's lap, the faint glow turning her face peaceful. The eldest stayed awake a little longer, eyes half open, watching Grady as if still unsure of his mercy. He nodded once, slowly, and she seemed to understand. Then she too closed her eyes, the room filled with the sound of soft breathing and rain. Grady sat in his chair by the hearth, the old rifle resting across his knees. He listened to the wind outside, to the steady rhythm of the storm, to the life that now filled the empty space he had lived in for so long. The firelight played across his face, deepening the lines carved there by years of solitude. He realized he was no longer angry at the silence. The ranch, once so still that even his own footsteps echoed too loud, now felt different. The ghosts that had haunted him for years seemed to pull back, giving way to something gentler. Maybe it was hope, or maybe just the faint warmth of knowing he wasn't alone. Hours passed. The rain softened to a whisper. A coyote called far away, its cry carried by the wind. Grady leaned back, his eyelids heavy. He thought about the soldiers who might come looking. He thought about what he would say if they did. He didn't care much anymore. Let them burn what was left. He had already lost everything once. The fire popped, sending sparks toward the ceiling. The sound reminded him of campfires from long ago, when men told stories under the stars and laughed like they'd live forever. He missed that laughter. He missed the noise of life. In the soft light of the fire, the women looked like a vision from another time. 5 souls bound together by fear and strength, survivors in a world that had forgotten mercy. And in that moment, Thomas Grady understood something that had taken him his whole life to learn. It wasn't land or cattle or gold that gave a man meaning. It was the people he chose to shelter when no one else would. The rain stopped just before dawn. The clouds thinned, and a pale light crept through the cracks in the walls. The windmill turned again, slow and steady. Grady rose from his chair, his joints stiff and aching. The fire had burned down to embers. He looked at the women, still asleep, their faces calm and peaceful. He stepped outside. The air was cool, clean, washed new by the night's storm. The desert smelled of sage and wet dust. In the distance, the horizon glowed faintly pink. He watched it for a long time, his breath hanging in the chill air. For the first time in years, he did not feel like a man waiting to die. He felt like a man who still had something left to do when he turned back toward the house. Smoke curled from the chimney, rising into the dawn like a promise that the world, harsh as it was, could still make room for kindness.